Good morning, everyone. As I see our gallery filling up here, we'll just wait a few moments for folks to come in and get settled before we kick off. And I'll remind everyone as you are funneling in to please use the chat feature to submit questions to our panelists. I am moderating the chat, so I'll do my best to incorporate as many of these as we can as we go through our session today. All right, we may have a few joining us afterwards, but let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to CMMC in Action, expert lessons you can't afford to miss. My name is Angela Czajkowski. I am the Managing Director for Supply Chain Construction and Real Estate here at Hartman Executive Advisors. And today I will be moderating this discussion with our three panel experts. Here in just a moment, I will be asking our panelists to introduce themselves. But first, again, use that chat feature to submit questions throughout the session. I will try to leave some time toward the end for additional open Q&A. We have a light agenda, so to speak, but really today in a sea of available CMMC content, we are determined to focus on the next level discussion of CMMC now that we have entered into maybe a newer phase. We assume everybody here knows what it is and why. And now it's really what do we need to be doing? How do we stay ahead, keep ahead, and not get caught unawares within this new level? So I'm going to ask Josh von Rueden if you would mind introducing yourself first to our audience.
Love to. Thanks, Angela. Good morning, everybody. Excited to be here to talk about CMMC. My name is Joshua von Rueden. I am the Senior Director of Cyber and Risk Management Services at Hartman Executive Advisors. I've been here for 3 years, and prior to that, spent about 16 years as a CISO in various cybersecurity roles. And prior to that was getting my Juris Doctor and had initially started my career in legal and decided I would make a worse choice and flip over to cybersecurity. So here I am today. Pleasure to be with everyone.
Thanks so much, Josh. Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Riismandel. Happy to be here today. I am the owner of Epoch Inc. We are a MSSP, or Managed Service Provider, Managed Security Service Provider, and we provide support for running businesses, everything from help desk to cybersecurity to application development. My previous life, I did 13 years of aerospace, LEO geosatellite, and battery development for the intelligence community. So during that time, I was the ISSM, which is the Information Security Systems Manager. So I've been dealing with compliance for quite some time.
Thank you, Chris. And last but certainly not least, Eric.
Awesome. Hey guys, I am Eric Levitas. I am the VP of Business Development here at Control Case. We're a C3PAO, 3PAO audit cert shop. We do every audit and cert you can think of. I've been in the cybersecurity space a little less than these guys, but for 5-6 years. So I have had the pleasure of working for RPOs, C3PAOs, training providers, publishing partners, had the opportunity to work with people all over the world to talk about this. I feel like I dream about CMMC. So happy to be a resource, looking forward to the discussion. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. That was a lot of acronyms coming out of just this introduction. So again, with these panelists, RPO, MSSP, C3PAO, the goal here is to understand the ecosystem, who you'll need, and how you should be preparing your organization now that we are in the next stage of enforcement. So why now? The CMMC final rule became effective in December of 2024. Now this rule and understanding it, knowing how to form your team and how to create the roadmap to compliance is especially critical for businesses in the defense industrial base as non-compliance could result in losing contracts, in not being included in contracts, in missed opportunities. We've certainly seen impacts to vendor sourcing behaviors and folks now taking this far more seriously and understanding what decisions they must make in their own value chains in order to maintain compliance. So let's get started with understanding what we're trying to accomplish here around creating that team. Josh, can you help our audience understand how they should begin readying themselves for this stage?
Okay, sorry, you broke up on me. Could you just ask that question one more time, Angela?
Sorry. Again, as we talk about team formation and ensuring that we have the right experts in place, the right folks on our team, the right bench built, the right roster, can you help our audience understand what they should be building out in terms of the strongest possible team?
Sorry. Yes, absolutely. So it takes a team, I think, is the first thing to talk about. So one, you're going to, within the organization seeking certification itself, the OSC, you have your internal stakeholders. Most of the time, you'll have some internal IT, you'll have some external vendors, et cetera. But supporting that and really providing the burst capability and the expertise that you need to meet the requirements, there are a couple that we really want to focus on. So one is going to be what we call an RPO, or Registered Practitioner Organization. That is what we at Hartman, as example, represent. We'll talk about that a little bit. In addition, we really want to be able to focus on what a C3 PAO, which is the certified assessor who's going to come in and provide that certification. And then there are other key elements, and one of the other ones that we'll address today is the managed service provider who's providing IT operations and security, and very often play a critical factor. One of the key elements of CMMC that I certainly appreciate, I think we all do, is, and we all sign, by the way, in terms of the ethical obligations when you meet one of these criteria, is that each role is siloed and you can't play multiple. So you can't certify someone that you have helped sort of build out that infrastructure for. You can't be both an RPO and a C3 PAO for the same organization, as an example. We also, as part of that ethical obligation, are required to be very forward with what the limits are, that we can't, as a RPO, as an example, we can't come in and guarantee that you're going to pass the certification. And so I think that's one of the bonuses that you get when you engage with those. Spending a little bit of time here on what an RPO is. So at Hartman and here on the Cybersecurity and Risk Management Services team, we are also an RPO. That means we're certified by Cyber AB, which is the accreditation body for CMMC. That means we have staff who have gone through those certifications. And essentially, it means that we have the understanding and expertise in terms of the CMC requirements, in terms of the certification process, in addition to being chief information security officers and security practitioners within cybersecurity in general. In terms of what we focus on, it's really helping ensure, that it's aligned to the business, right? At the end of the day, this is not an IT project. It's not an IT engagement. The goal here is to engage and be able to compete for contracts with DoD. So we're making sure that that is front and center in terms of setting up the goals and what we're trying to achieve here. Most teams also don't have the organic expertise to engage and successfully meet the requirements for CMMC. It's a heavy lift. You'll hear us probably use the term, it's leveling up your IT infrastructure 9 out of 10 times. And it's, an example I would use is you wouldn't go to a car mechanic and say, hey, I also need you to take care of this fighter jet. Can you just figure it out, right? It's sort of similar for IT, where you want to build in and add that sort of burst expertise to provide that capability. Have some knowledge transfer, make it sustainable over time, build the tools and the requisite knowledge that you need to maintain it, which is required for that expertise as well. And also help teams be more effective and time efficient. Understand, because we've done it time and time again, what are sort of time sinks and wastes of time? Where do you want to focus the team and how do you want to do that? So that was a lot of words. I'll pause there.
No, that was fantastic. And again, as we talk about building out your team, I love that you stressed that ethical component of how we have to silo. And that's kind of, as I look at the screen, I see each of these silos represented, but I think that's a really interesting concept of building out your team isn't necessarily that there is no one size fits all. There is no silver bullet. There isn't, if I just have this one organization in my corner, I will pass. And I love the highlight of nobody can guarantee anybody kind of passing audit and getting through the process. So really it's about finding experts to advise you through the process. So Chris, I'd love to bring you into the conversation then in terms of your role within this team that Josh has aligned us to building.
Sure. So I think ultimately, like we like to say, it's the four legs of the stool, right? You've got the client who has to have ownership of the data and their processes, right? You've got the RPO that does the advisory. You have the MSSP or MSP who's in the middle, who kind of ties everything from an operational perspective, right? We take the policies and procedures, we put in the technical controls, we help build the artifacts into place so that by the time you get to the fourth leg of the stool, which is the C3POA, the auditor, they come in and they can go ahead and audit and hopefully achieve compliance, right? Or but hopefully it's really a team aspect where the RPO, your MSP, and the client themselves specifically are part of it. This is not something you can just abdicate and say, hey, MSP, go take care of this. Hey, RPO, please tell me how to get passed, and then I'm done. It's a new way of life for a lot of organizations. It really is their journey to service level maturity and getting to the point where, how do they have that cadence in place so they can make these changes, they can scale, they can grow, and get that maturity that Josh was talking about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So Eric, as we talk about this team, how do you view your seat here, knowing that you are representing sort of that authoritative approach as the C3PAO? I'd love to hear your sort of approach and role there.
Yeah, it's an odd place to be honest with you, because it is in none of my team, my assessors team, our sales team, our operations team. We are the final boss at the end, right? We're Big Bad Bowser. Mario finally found us, and we could not help Mario through that process. We couldn't guide him. We couldn't share anything with him. And it's up to the team here and whoever was involved internally to make sure that they're ready to meet with us. So it's an interesting place to be, because again, we do a lot of different audits, and other audits allow us to be a little bit more iterative sometimes on the readiness side. But with C3PAO, there's a lot of fear that plays into effect that, C3PAO or CMMC is looking for perfection. So I think, hearing what Chris and Josh had to say, like, Mr. or Mrs. End client really needs to take ownership of this process, build their puzzle pieces, find their right team, engage with the right people that have had the right training, do your due diligence, ask the right questions to build this team, because you are kind of at their mercy, your internal team's mercy, to get to the finish line, which is us. And again, I think one thing I want to end on this part on is, if I'm an organization seeking assessment, say you have a director of IT, you have a IT manager, it's a tough place to put your IT manager and say, this is on you. I'm not going to give you any resources. I'm not going to provide you any funding. You're responsible for getting me compliant. And I've seen these IT managers sweating, because I feel bad for them that they're held to the fire to say, it's do or die. If I don't do this right, if I don't have the right resources and they find me and then I fail them, there's nothing I can do, right? So I think building your team as quickly as possible to lock down and identify scope, and then build within that scope, again, with these key players, it's going to do nothing but save you time and money. And it's going to do nothing but save you the heartache of, I don't want to fail you. It's a horrible conversation to have.
I love that. And you talked about sort of the oh no moment of an IT leader having to advance this. And then on the flip side of that, we hear stories about business leaders delaying, or maybe not taking, I want to say not taking it seriously. That would be a very unfair characterization, but rather saying, let's wait and see. Let's wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see how enforcement works. Let's wait and see. And so if you were speaking to a business leader, and Chris, I'd love for you to field this first, because I know you've seen business leaders at all stages of their journey, of all levels of maturity within this certification approach. A lot of business leaders think they can afford to wait. How do you react to that? And what can you share with us about those who have waited, those who haven't? How can you help impart some wisdom to our audience about the wait and see approach?
Sure. I think what we've seen is that this journey is to do it in a sane manner is we're seeing about approximately 18 months to that journey from the moment you start to the moment that you complete it. You can do it a lot faster if you have the budget, the resources, and the internal resources, most importantly, to be able to drive that. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of that happening. And granted, you still have to run your business, right? You still have to do all of your main objectives while trying to achieve compliance. And this is a new way of life for a lot of organizations. And I think if what my concern or what I see a lot of times is when we meet people like, oh yeah, no problem. Hey, no problem. Or no one's afraid to tell the client, no, you can't do that because of this compliance. No, you can't do this because of X. And if you're not hearing no along the way, and you don't have to change anything, that should probably be a red flag for you as well too. And I notice a lot of people sometimes will self-assess that we'll get, and they'll say, oh yeah, we do this. And from the lens that they're looking at, sure, they do it. But as soon as you look at the scope, and Eric, that's probably something, you could probably talk a little bit more about. And same thing, Josh, in terms of scoping is, hey, where do they need to be compliant? What's the scope of that compliance? And what type of impact does that have with the organization? And that's where I would kind of step back and say, okay, if I'm not hearing no from my key people who are working on this, or not telling me I have to change stuff, or there's no modification to my processes, that should be a red flag right out of the gate.
Fantastic. Thank you. So are you able to, or what could you share in terms of maybe a more direct story or example? Do you have any examples that you can share?
Sure. Well, I think like specifically some of I think the simple one is change management. Having a change management process within an organization. I think a lot of people, hey, I wrote my policies and I'm done. What we're really seeing the gap is in between the actual procedures that are the internal organization. How do you do the things that you say that you're doing? How are you operationally taking care of those things within the business? And then do they match the policies? Because, it's very difficult for your MSP to write you policies based upon your internal procedures. So that's something that the ownership has to happen with the new organization. And same thing with change and change management, having what's your internal process when you make changes? Do you just say do it and it happens, or have you formalized that? And can you, provide the documentation to say, hey, yes, if we have a change, this is how we invoke the change, and this is how it's enforced, and this is how it's noted. And and understanding that, and that's I think the real art that we start seeing, where as soon as the organization starts doing that, and everyone within their roles in the organization start embodying that perspective, you start to see the change happen more rapidly with the organization, and you start seeing that maturity within the business as well too, which is fun because that's when they start to scale and grow.
Thank you for that, Chris. So Josh, I want to ask you about, so when we think about change, and Chris, I love your call out to change and change management, but I think we all know that change is as much cultural as it is anything. And something of the magnitude, a program the magnitude of CMMC, and the imperative nature of, I can't remember which one of you said it, perfection. We're seeking perfection. Like you have to, it's a big heavy lift, and you need to do it effectively and well. So yes, change management, and yes, perfection. And so yes, Josh, to you, the cultural change that to happen within an organization, how are you seeing folks embrace a new cultural approach to change management, to their compliance, as we're helping folks come along their own maturity model and become compliant and get the certification levels? What are you seeing folks do differently? How are they creating good habits? How are they creating that culture of or embracing a new cultural approach to operating so that they can be compliant and then ultimately continue on this path?
I'm going to answer that, Angela, but before I do, can I just go back, and there was one example I wanted to give to your prior question, which I think, and that was to Chris, which was can we afford to wait and things like that? And we had two instances come up very quickly. I just wanted to very briefly offer this because
Absolutely.
It's so present for a couple of our clients that we're helping. So we had two who essentially their full business is DoD. And it represents a couple examples here that we'll keep getting into, but essentially in both cases, they had self-scored at a perfect 110. So for everyone that's not familiar, basically it goes from negative 203 if you're not doing anything up to a perfect 110. You're somewhere on that spectrum. The goal is to get to that 110, of course. That's where you should be. They had it assessed there, and essentially felt that they had time before they needed to worry about the certification side that we're talking about now with the final rule. As it turns out, an entity called DIVCAC, which is basically their prime, the government came in and said, hey, we're going to do a essentially surprise assessment of you. And they gave them 2 months warning. We happen to have been there for other reasons, not helping that. And it turns out that they had grossly overestimated their actual score and realized that they had about 6 months of work to do in 2 months to get that done and sort of to get to the point. And one of the things that, you want to be mindful of and watch out for is sort of that gross overestimation of where you are and whether that starts to get into fraud and negligence and things like that. And, in these cases, they're very well-meaning individuals. They were just, not fully aware of what to be looking at and things like that. And so this is something to take seriously even today, and definitely don't wait on it for a lot of reasons, and sort of expect that 6 to 12 months ramp up time. And we've seen it a couple times where that's coming out. In addition to, there's always sort of the publication of those that get caught with fraud. There was a few that happened even last month. I think the company's name was Morse. I'm not throwing them under the bus. This was not our client. This is out in the public. But it was essentially the same thing, that they vastly overestimated. They didn't have some of the required documentation. And so they wound up owing something like $4 million. And obviously there's a reputational hit. So in addition to worried about the timelines that are set here, this is something that you definitely want to take seriously, right? It's the foundations of the business and reputation. Pivoting now from that, I think you mentioned it, sort of, it's leveling up the IT program. We have found very few times where IT sort of existed in the state where they had the underlying foundations where they could meet the requirements here. And so really what this is shifting the culture. And I think one of the things that I want to make sure to emphasize is this is not an IT project. It shouldn't sit with IT. IT is enabling it. But this is really a change in how the organization does business utilizing sort of its IT ecosystem. It's a change in the workflow. It's a change in how you train. It's a change in the amount of evidence that you need to be seeing as a senior leader, right, from the C-suite down, what you're asking to see, what you should be expecting, how the workforce does their business, all changes. And for that reason, I know Chris and Eric and I talk about this all the time, sort of you need to expect it's about a 6 to 12 month process, unless you truly feel you're at that sort of mature level. I would also say the amount of detail, and I don't want to get into sort of steal Eric's thunder here, but where we see the majority of where we've been at least has sat in on the certification process where it hasn't gone well, is where the documentation is lacking, right? Where the policies and the procedures just don't reflect the reality. It's sort of, hey, those are documents that are down there. We downloaded these templates and it just doesn't reflect what the people are doing. Or, hey, we have these 4 people, everything's in their head. They know it, but the rest of the team has no idea what's going on. Those are areas of sort of key risk. And it's really leveling up that whole cycle of policy procedure to how the controls are implemented, which frankly is probably the easiest side of it, even though there's a lot of it, and then down to the evidence. And the evidence is the other one I would call out, where you have those first 2 elements, the written documentation, the controls, but you're not showing that you're doing it. You're not showing it's doing what you think it's doing over time. And when they look back, they see gaps, and that's a major gap as well. So sort of having that sort of ecosystem in place and having the capacity to get that done, right? It's not just, it's not all automated. You have to have and create the hours and time for people to be doing those things. And that's all a real change to sort of the IT and work culture.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you
Eric,
for that.
Josh, I was going to add one other point too. Sometimes we're seeing where they write these elaborate policies and procedures, and they're way too much, which once again, it falls the other side of, hey, you're not doing what you say you're doing. We've changed this process. Well, where's the change management to denote that you changed that? So once again, it's, making sure that your policies and your procedures line up with what you're actually doing, and being consistent with that. And then obviously having the, artifacts or evidence to support that specifically within the organization, and utilizing tools that allow you to do that. And
I love that mindset. And that's what I really think about when I think about culture, is that you can't do all of this work and check a box and then think that that is kind of it's not a set it and forget it. You're not good forever. This is, you have to your point, Chris, you have to live it. You have to show that change management. You have to show that you are continually iterating, and that there is that we've embraced this way of operating, that what got us those check marks is how we live now. And so it's not we did it and now we're good to go forever. This is how we live. We have reframed how we operate to ensure that we've accommodated these policies, these procedures, we're changing, et cetera. So I think that's a really interesting call out. And I love the ongoing documentation mindset, Josh, because I think we sometimes see that documents can be completed and then get, we did the document, but not, we live the document, we breathe the document, we iterate the document, we train, et cetera. Eric, from your perspective, in terms of folks waiting and then getting to the 11th hour or now it's time for an audit, or we've waited, we don't have 6 to 12 months, using Josh's example, we have 2 months, and now we're going to hyper invest and try to play catch up. Can you share with our audience some examples, or an example that you've experienced and what you've seen kind of the outcomes be?
Yeah, I think what's interesting, and it kind of ties back to what you guys were saying, a lot of the industry is prepping and preparing for their C3PAO audit. Year one. Nobody's thinking about what happens after year one. Nobody's thinking about the upkeep and management that has to take place, come year two, the annual attestation requirements, and what the auditor is going to be looking at, the second iteration of the audit, the third iteration of the audit, 3-6 years down the road. And, I think as these businesses are scrambling, and as these businesses are building their infrastructures, which again, I've seen it. You have a contract come up. I mean, MAPS is out, right? The MAPS contract is out. I don't know if anybody heard about that. It's basically asking these contractors to engage with the C3PAO and have a letter of attestation. And I believe it's asking them to have a certification by a certain time. I don't know how they can require that yet or not, but I'm hearing different things from different contractors. And you see people later down their road saying, look, we're ready for an audit. We want it in the summer. We've been working on this for 18 months. Great. Let's talk through that. Let's look at what that looks like. Then you have the other side of the spectrum where you've got folks saying, I want to bid on this contract. This is money we need. We need to bid on this. What's GMMG? And I'm like, you don't even, right? We're not even talking the same verbiage here. You have no idea what CMMC is. You can't even explain how to implement it. So, here's what we need to start doing, and here's the path you need to take, and here's the partners you need to engage. And there are ways to implement quickly, again, if you have the right resources and budget in place, but you have to go through a migration effort if that's in scope, or if you have to go through a whole shift in culture, that is almost physically impossible to do quickly. It's possible to execute and make buying decisions, but to actually do the work. And again, when the auditor comes in, there's no requirements in CMMC that says you have to have things in place for certain amounts of months, like SOC 2. Hey, we want to see that you've implemented something for a certain amount of months. CMMC doesn't ask for that. But again, to Chris's point, I can't tell you how many people come in and go, yeah, we have this process we do every 6 months. And it's like, that's crazy, because you started your CMMC journey 3 months ago. So how do you have a 6-month? So you can't show us that. That doesn't meet the requirements, because what you said and what you do not match. If you would have said you have a 3-month look back period, and we can see that you started 3 months ago, again, there's way more to that. That's the most basic form of it. There's opportunities for you to find, green check marks when you go into the audit, but we've seen a lot of people over explain and overcommit and unable to deliver. So, even if you're getting done quickly, you can't give the auditor a 5-page SSP. I mean, you can, I wouldn't, but you shouldn't give the auditor a 5-page SSP, and you also shouldn't give them a 50,000-page SSP of fluff. Both are bad scenarios, and sounds pretty basic. And I think I would assume most of the people on and listening would know that, but it is when you're held against the fire and you read this control and you're like, I think it's asking it this way. And yeah, we do that. And maybe I've even looked at the objective and I'm pretty sure we do that. You really don't know until you engage the right resources, gone through the right education, or brought in the right people to validate your validation. And by doing that takes time. So it's never a good situation to be in to rush at the 11th hour. I haven't seen it work yet.
Eric, I'm going to ask you to continue on that train of thought. With CMMC readiness, we've talked about the evolution to a higher maturity level. And to be successful, you need to move away from a pass the test approach We've talked about readiness taking time, the cultural shift not being a cram session. So as a C3PAO, you've seen firsthand what separates organizations that are truly prepared from those just trying to pass the test. Why is this early strategic preparation critical, not just for passing the audit, but for building lasting maturity?
Yeah, so let's think about this, right? So let's say you're a 500-person organization. You've simplified your scope. Maybe there's only 50 people in scope. Maybe you have an enclave. Maybe there's X, Y, and Z people. Well, let's say you have an MSP. Let's say you have 5 or 6 external service providers in scope. You've got, something that stores, processes, or transmits CUI. You have an external service provider over here that doesn't do that. Right? So like all these complexity and all these pieces that go into it, it's interesting to me because what I'm seeing is first off, we love early adopters, but a lot of these early adopters are forgetting about the bigger picture of their environment, and the bigger picture of their environment doesn't only include them. You are not the only person in scope some of the times, right? Maybe you are, but again, I think the way that I would answer your question, at least what I'm seeing, is a lot of the organizations seeking assessment are like, I'm good. We've paid somebody to write our docs. We're good. Everything's good. And then, maybe we come in and we go, but what about, it looks like you're using X, Y, and Z cloud service provider. Like, oh yeah, but don't worry about them. It's like, no. What are they doing for you? It's like, well, they do this for us, but they don't touch CUI. And it's like, well, do you understand what a security protection asset and the requirements behind that? Have they done this? Have they done that? No. It's like, well, we need to go get that now, right? So what if they don't have it? That's extra time. And what if they do have it, but it's wrong? That's extra time that you have to commit and spend making sure that you're doing your due diligence. So I think maybe I've gone off topic here, but it's been a very prevalent thing in my world is managing your customer responsibilities matrix, managing your supply chain, managing all the people around you to dictate your success, and they can also dictate your failure. And it is probably the number one thing I am seeing as a C3PAO for all these early adopters, for all these people sprinting to the finish line, for these people that have even invested years into this, is they are forgetting about their supply chain. They're not managing their scope effectively. They're keeping things in scope or out of scope that shouldn't be, and they're not properly documenting it. And it's just a disaster waiting for happen. And it's the number one thing that I am seeing that is causing a disaster in CMMC is just the ESP conversation, who is and who isn't out of scope, and how you've validated that to the auditor. So I maybe have gone off topic, but it's a roundabout answer to your question.
If I can just jump in and before we go down a rabbit hole of the external service providers and cloud service providers and all the acronyms and things, I think just to echo kind of what Eric, who made a good point, is I think 2 things here, kind of circling back, is one, just the scope and breadth is large, right? So you're talking about there's 110 practices in NIST 800-171. But supporting that, what you're actually being audited against is 320 objectives. And your team has to have the time to be able to deliver on all of those, and it's pass-fail. There is some ability in 180 days for, we won't go into the detail here, but they're scored at 1, 3, and 5 points, and you can fail a certain number of 1 points and be able to fix them. But we're to put that aside. It's generally pass-fail, and that's a lot of elements to address. For those who haven't gone through it, I think the other thing here is the auditors know what they're doing. They know what to look for, and they go into detail. They're going to be interviewing people. They're going to be shadowing and looking over your shoulder. They're going to be diving into and choosing. They can't look at all 320 areas, right? They're going to be looking at the things that seem a little, as my kids would say, sus, meaning suspect, and they're going to say, I want to hear a little bit more about that. And some of the things they look at, I think, I don't know if we mentioned this before, is this needs to be a habit and not a panic, where you're sort of bursting up to pass that test and I'm cramming, but it's clear that it's not a habit. An example of that we saw was an auditor shadowing one of the IT people, and they said, hey, here's a routine step that you should be doing daily in terms of looking at who's logging in. That individual had to pull up a document to see what it was he was supposed to be doing, and then went and did it. So it was clear that it was not a habit. And so from the top to bottom, to have those things in place and be able to do that well, it takes time. And you've just got to give yourself a good 6 to 12 months. To Eric's point, I think anything less than that and the odds of a successful certification are low.
I'd add one more point. I think we have our first client we started with, we're doing CMMC, was back in 2017, 2018, very early adopter. They said, this is coming out. We want to start working towards this. We have gone through that process multiple times with them over time. And what has happened? Their business changes, their business grows. You know, they've been successful. What does that mean? That means that things change. Their policies and procedures change. They have to have change management. Oh, we've now added new features and new capabilities within the business. Okay, that expanded the scope. To Eric's point, it's ever evolving and making sure that it's not just oh, we just decided to do this. Well, what's the impact? What's that going to do to our compliance? How are we going to make these changes? And how can we be a little bit more thoughtful about changing that culture within the organization to start embedding or embodying that culture of compliance and service level maturity?
That's fantastic insight. So Josh, you talked about pass fail, and that's so extraordinarily black and white. Does anyone have an example, or have we seen many fails? And what does failure, a true fail, what does that mean? Eric, perhaps you can just kind of walk us through the characterization of, if it's a fail, what is that? What is the reality of a fail?
Yeah, I mean, if you fail a 3-pointer or a 5-pointer, you fail. Josh mentioned some allowable poems. Again, I don't think it's right for this conversation, but there are allowable poems in the 1-point items that do allow the auditor and the organization seeking certification 180 days to go back and fix. Look, this is a new process. Remember, the auditors have their own, these lead CCAs that are running these assessments not only have their own reputation, they have their personality, they have their own certification that backs their name, that if they feel like this is the right or wrong way to assess an objective, you, Mr. or Mrs. OSA, might not like it, but it's up to them to make a determination, and it's their brand, it's their, reputation, it's their certification on the line. So they're doing what's best for the organization, which is the C3PAO, for them and for the end client. So 3 and 5-point immediate failures. If you fail, you go back, you fix it, you come back, you engage with me again. You have to pay me the entire money again, right? So I don't want that, right? That sounds like a great business model, doubling down efforts. We're trying to mitigate that with like mock assessments and pushing them to RPOs and pushing them to MSPs to say, look, please do your due diligence. You don't want to find your way in a situation where you fail. But yeah, I mean, there's a failure option, and then there's a not getting out of phase 1 option. So there's multiple phases to the C3PO assessment. In phase 1, the assessors are actually reviewing your documentation, even at a cursory review, and there's very easy, quick things that the auditor would say, whoa. External service providers, incorrect, limited documentation, no network topography, no data flow, right? Just the basic things. If you don't have those things, the auditor actually has the right to not allow you to proceed to the actual audit to even fail. So that doesn't constitute a failure. It constitutes not moving forward in the process, and then you're stalled, which we don't want. It affects our timelines, our people's times. And then if you're hoping to have that certification in hand by a certain date, that doesn't happen anymore. So there are examples of failures and examples of stallness in terms of a C3PO assessment. And the last thing I wanted to say, and to Chris's point, this kind of rounds out my point. Remember, the auditor is given what to assess. They're actually told in certain objectives this is an interview one, this is a review one. I forgot what the specific verbiage is, but they're actually told based on control, based on objective, how to validate that control. So it is, the auditor not only has their best interest in mind to make these decisions, they also have a CMMC assessment process they have to follow. And we can't falter from that. Me, the other C3POs, I can't just go off the whim and say, my auditors will do things differently. My auditors don't follow that crazy process. Every auditor should follow the best practices as outlined in the Code of Professional Conduct and follow the outline within the CAP. And if we all do that and hopefully keep personality out of it, then again, it's going to lead to either stall or fail, no in between, right? There should be no ambiguity because we're all following this same process. So
Angela, if I can add the business, sort of another business aspect to that, getting back to your question is, in addition to that detail level and basically saying, okay, now you have to go back to the drawing board, sign up again for the test, go take the test again, if you will. is the risk to the business, right? So if you don't have that, so I think just quickly to call out, so the CMMC final rule 32 CFR Part 170 was passed in December. So that is, we know exactly what the requirements are. You can go get certified against that today since then, right? So we've been talking about that. The piece that's still to drop is called 48 CFR, and that is the piece that ties it to a contract that says, okay, now your contracts require this. That is expected sometime in May or June, and that starts that 12-month clock to have that certification. So if you don't have it at the end of that 12-month, you basically can't go and compete for a business, and you can lose your contracts. So that's sort of that 12-month. In between now and then, it is up to the primes, and they can make a determination saying, I want you to have this. I'm not going to let you compete for this contract. Does that mean you're going to lose it? Not necessarily. Is it likely? Probably not, right? They want that continuity. But that does become a risk to bear in mind. And so I think not having those good sales scores between now and then also not passing the test, if you will, not having that certification, at the end of the day, that puts the business at risk in terms of what contracts you can actually compete for or maintain.
Thank you for that, Josh. So we actually have a question in the chat, and it's around timeline. So I want to make sure we're being really clear in how we communicate those timeline elements. So the question is, timeline has been mentioned throughout. I've heard from contractors that there aren't enough assessors. Is that accurate? And if so, does that extend the 18 months that Chris mentioned? So I guess to the panel, are there enough assessors, and is that affecting timeline?
So I'll give you the logical answer, which is, of course not. There's like 63, 65 C3PAOs. There's like 100 or maybe 200 lead CCAs. All C3PAOs require 3 CCAs on the assessment, a lead, a CCA, and the CQAP, who's also a CCA. So if now you do the math, and it's like, how many can we do a month? So the logical answer, of course, we don't have enough assessors, but is the government taking that into consideration? I have no solid answer of they're saying, yeah, we agree. The government has been expecting you to do this for years. So, they're expecting people to be ready. They're expecting people to go through the audit. To Josh's point, once 48 CFR and this multi-year period starts to roll out, it is imperative for you to be ready, have open communication with your contracts officers and primes and your supply chain to say, what's the risk of waiting for all these auditors to be booked up? And then is your contracts officer going to go, it's okay, like, they're busy, like, we understand, but these other 50 people got audited because they jumped the line and they got ready earlier, but we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. I just don't think that's going to happen. So do I think the government is going to give leniency? I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but I think from what I have heard is, first off, there's more and more candidate C3POs. There's more and more people going through their own DIPCAC to become auditors. There's more and more people going through training. So I would say, don't live and die by that. And if you're having that conversation, in my mind, you're trying to give an excuse to be like, it's okay. We don't have to invest. We don't have to do these things. So to you, Blaine, hello, Blaine. First off, I would tell your clients that don't think that's your end game, because I don't think the government really cares.
Yeah, and then I would just echo. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I was going to say, for the timeline of 18 months, that's the same time. That's a same amount of time to do the entire process. If you've heard Josh earlier, he said 6 to 12 months is, hey, you can get it done. But this is, but it depends upon, what do you need to do to become compliant? Do you have to do huge migrations? What are all these things that need to be done? And what we're seeing is that, hey, it can be done in 3 to 6 months. It can be done, but that's extremely disruptive to an organization. You're better off saying, okay, we're going to do this. Let's start working on it now if you haven't already, or maybe you've already started for 6 months. Maybe you only have 6 to 12 months left to complete the process. So that's kind of how I look at it in the timeline. Now, with that said, we don't know what your contract due dates are going to be. Just like Eric said, they might come back and say, hey, we're going to start enforcing this in our next, contract in October. Well, that may become a problem for you, right? So getting ahead of this sooner than later is really important, and making sure you get really close to the goal line. So when you're ready to do that audit, you can.
And just, I would echo on it. There are clearly not enough resources. We've been talking about that. The industry has been talking about that for years and years and years, and that's across the board. Whether it's the most acutely C3PAOs, but also whether it's RPO or MSPs that can operate, there just aren't enough. That being said, I think the things that we at least are strongly recommending and would encourage is make sure that your self-scoring is in line, in place, and accurate and updated. Most, if not, I would say the vast majority aren't at that perfect 110 score. And if you are, I would just make sure that you're giving it the scrutiny it needs and that that's realistic. And then be addressing that POAM and have a goal of this year, 2025, to get to that 110, have addressed your POAM and be ready to then go and sign up and sort of get queued into a C3PAO, go through those interviews, which, by the way, interviews, C3PAOs, you don't have to just sign up for one, right? There are differences between them, not in terms of one being easier or another, but there are different personalities, different capabilities, different capacity. You want to go through that process, be ready by the end of the year. And most of them are going to say, have you scored 110? They're going to ask you for that, right? They're going to ask you for your cage code. They're going to go, look, if you aren't at 110, don't waste my time, right? We are going to fail this. And so make sure that you're there for that this year, and then plan on 2026 of being able to take that certification. I'd also just mention it depends on where you are in your business. If your business is maybe 5% of your revenue is coming from these contracts, that may be more of a risk you're willing to take compared to if you're 90, 100% in the DoD. I would not be relying on that capacity to be there, and I would be pushing for this quickly.
So Josh, if somebody has a low or uncertain self-assessment score, what's their best way to course correct and move forward?
So I will say, as I'm thinking through sort of everyone that we've gone through, there's only a handful who have self-scored accurately, and that's not by deceit or any intentional misconduct. That's because the team that was doing it didn't know the questions to ask. We've had a couple examples where they were all, they're looking at NIST 800-181, which is those 110, and they weren't even looking at the practices in alpha, which you need to be looking at. And so most of the time, they're not going to be accurate, and that's fine. Just make sure you're getting them accurate at this point. I would also encourage, because we get this question all the time, what if we took a close look now and we realized that our actual score is -20 and not the 90 that we had been scoring for the last 3 years? Score it accurately. When you're scoring it, put yourself in a silo and don't consider any prior scores. Don't let that influence you. Everyone here should have sort of that professional, ethical, not in this call, but those that are doing it to, it's their reputation to score what you see it and be, you want to, you'll probably put it in the fairest light possible, but it needs to be realistic and you need to be able to justify it. And you're far better making that a realistic score and then having your story be, you know what, we learned more as we went. We identified that we had gaps we didn't before. That is a much better story to tell that is more acceptable than what looks like fraud, right? Where you're just continually inflating it and not bringing in expertise to help you. Angela, to your point, the other thing I would recommend is most teams don't have this expertise. It's difficult to go out and sort of ask them in addition to their day job, or they don't have enough hours to just do the study online. Bring in an RPO, whether it's Hartman, anyone else in the industry, have them help you take a look, whether it's having them or someone like us do a full assessment for you, or just chime in and sort of do, work with the team with a smaller set of hours just to help sort of give the confidence that you need that your baseline is accurate. We have another question in the chat. Chris, I'm going to direct this toward you, but Eric and Josh, feel free to add on. How are you seeing MSPs get rolled into the audit as an ESP?
So it's a great question. I see Eric smiling on that one, right? So it really depends upon what the involvement is with the organization. Some of our clients are wanting us to sit in with the audit process or be available during that audit process to help support in any way, getting the technical controls or anything behind the scenes of the services that we're providing in support of that audit. I think other things depending on the sophistication of the organization themselves and the type of players they have on their team internally. Sometimes we can provide them the information that they need so they can go through the audit themselves. So it really just depends on what's the right fit for that organization and how do we have to augment their staff accordingly. I'm going to just add to that. So, and hopefully this will be what Eric was about to jump in on as well. So there has to be a vendor responsibility matrix. If you don't have that, you're going to fail, by the way. That is going to expressly detail
what the involvement is of the MSP as well as any other vendors and what they're responsible for. And for those areas is what they're going to do. I think what Chris is also mentioning is sort of that staff hog. For example, we have some clients who they just have zero IT, small shops, 10-person, 20-person shop, maybe up to 30, but they don't have dedicated IT. And that's where they hire the MSP who comes in and does that work. In that case, the MSP is part of what's also called the system security plan. They're within the scope of what's happening. They're going to be interviewed. They're a part of the process that the C3PO is going to look at. I will say, by the way, that if the MSP has their own CMMC certification and or even without that, there's going to be a lot of assumptions made typically, maybe this is where I hand off to Eric, where the C3POs, the auditors, are going to not look in as much detail to the MSP as long as all the documentation's in place. They're not going to look at every single aspect of the MSP's business to make sure necessarily, unless something calls out as suspect or something like that. So Eric, over to you.
Yeah, no, they're not in scope at all. No, I'm just kidding. They are. So here's what I will say, right? There is a table 4, 170.19 C2I in this crazy long CMMC process. It identifies external service providers and breaks them up by cloud service provider, non-cloud service provider. If they store, process, or transmit CUI, if they don't, if they're security protection, they process security protection data, and as such a security protection asset, and then if they're neither. And it exactly tells you who is in scope and what their requirements are within your scope. Go read that, because I can't tell you how many MSPs, ESPs, CSPs, whatever, all these crazy acronyms just tell me they're like, yeah, but I don't store, process, or transmit CUI. And it's like, that's awesome. Then you don't need FedRAMP. That's great. You can save your money. That's phenomenal. But you're also doing these other activities. And when your client goes up to the auditor and says, well, I don't handle that. My MSP handles that. It's like the auditor is going to come and review and say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. MSP, so you have to be available. You at minimum need to align yourself to 800-171 for the applicable controls. Going out and getting your level 2 certification is a best practice, not a requirement. But remember, it's like now that auditor starts to look at the applicable controls and then they start to go, wait a second, they spiderweb into your network. Well, without that certification, the auditor in theory can go crazy and start to kind of spiderweb for anything. You manage this, you upkeep that. Well, wait a second, that's stored here. How do you do that here? Well, we don't do that. Fail, right? That's bad, right? So we want to, getting a level 2 certification still keeps the MSP involved. So even though that rumor that's out there that says like, hey, if we get our level 2 cert, everything goes away. No, there's still shared responsibilities. There's still a customer responsibility. There's your responsibilities, right? So like you have to be able to tell your auditor and paint that story. So to Chris's point, not only should you include them, they have to like, you should be engaging with them early and often to make sure they have their stuff together. You have your stuff together. You have your entire story painted for that auditor. Go check out that scoping. It's called ESP scoping requirements. It's in the rule, and it is the number. I have it like saved as a JPEG on my picture on my computer because it comes up 10 out of 10 conversations on audit discussions, readiness discussions, kickoff discussions. It's always, well, what is this? Open the JPEG, we start to play the game of what box are you, and then we read the rule to them, and then we interpret it. So yes, 100%. Every situation is different, but there is that you have to. That is where the scoping discussion comes into play, and optimizing your scope early and often to make sure whoever owns what, when, and where, and why is painted clearly for the auditor. So if you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this topic because it is the number one thing that is talked about, missed, not worked on by clients, and just forgotten about in the process. And it's a huge piece to the CMMC ecosphere.
Thank you for that. I love the passion around this, Eric. So I want to take just a moment to wrap us up here. So what I've heard is, and to the audience, I'm hearing key takeaways here. We've heard early and often, probably more times than anything else, is start now. If this is something you need to embark on, by all means, the time is now if you haven't already. Allowing yourself the time. And I've also heard about the budget that surrounds this. So it's, there is a cost associated, and to your point, Josh, evaluating, are we willing to invest the dollars to to embark on and complete this journey effectively. And I'm hearing a lot about being candid with ourselves. You know, what are we really doing? I love that approach, Josh, that you said about answering the self-assessment in a silo. What does it look like now and today? And again, so that approach of preparedness and bringing a cultural change to the organization and being prepared to really embrace this as a new way of operating if it's not already part of how you behave. Panelists, any concluding thoughts for our audience that you would like for them to take away?
I'll give my quick thought. I have, to your point, Angela, I respect two types of government contractors. If you have, let's just focus on DoD right now. If you have DoD contracts, you store, process, or transmit CUI, you need a CMMC certification. If you cannot justify that, like if your contract is worth $1 and you're going to go invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and you believe it's not advantageous for you to continue to do work with the DoD, which let's even forget about the FAR rule coming out, which is right. I do respect businesses that get fully out. If you don't believe it's a good business decision for you and they remove themselves from government work and just focus on commercial work, I respect that. Then I also respect the people that can validate to know that this is a business differentiator. The DoD is the first one to take on this CMMC endeavor. You see this FAR CUI clause that's coming out that's going to make CUI protection government-wide. So if you can't get away from government business, do not go in, half with this. I'm trying to think of the not inappropriate word to say. You can't go half with this, right? You have to be all in and all out. And the same tone applies for your RPOs, your C3PAOs, your MSPs, any partner you work with, all in or all out. I don't respect anybody in the middle. It's my only thought there.
I've got a few that I'll just rattle through. I think we highlighted a bunch of them, but one, don't treat this as an IT project. It's a business project to achieve a critical strategic business goal. So treat it that way and have it sort of live, although IT is a key enabler, you want it to sit outside of that. Set realistic goals and timeframes. Your team will thank you for that, as will you. It vastly increase your opportunity to succeed here and get the certification. Minimum necessary. We're not going to go into detail now, but an enclave approach, sort of the smallest scope that needs to be compliant is what you want to generally get to. It's going to give you the best chance. You don't want to be overbroad. Watch out for resourcing, not just for the initial sort of burst phase, but also the ongoing. That's an area that can catch you. And I think, I forgot who brought it up, but it's a great point, is encourage no's. If you're hearing from the team, just everything is going well, it's fine, you're not getting the full story. You're missing something, and you really want those voices, and you want to encourage that open discussion that talks about the barriers, that talks about the challenges, and the gaps. And we've seen a couple examples where that wasn't the work culture. The team just didn't feel like they could communicate that, and it created a lot of challenges downstream. And then just, as we talked about, it's leveling up IT and the maturity there, and just understand that.
From my perspective, I think it's your business, your responsibility, your risk. We're here to help you make this journey and slowly get your business to that compliant state. And I think if you, as a business owner or a key team member in that business, understand that perspective, you'll be beyond successful. It's when it's the delegation or the abdication comes into play. That's when we tend to see that companies flounder through this process. So obviously minimize those risks by taking ownership of it.
Fantastic. Chris, Eric, Josh, thank you so much for joining me today. Again, I'm Angela Czajkowski with Hartman Executive Advisors. Please stay tuned for part 2 of this discussion. This does not stop here. We have a part 2 of the CMMC panel journey, which we will be promoting very shortly. Audience, thank you for joining us. And that is all for today. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.